curious. There. She followed him and soon found herself falling a very deep hole into a strange place called Curious. Conversation. Curious. Conversation.
Beforehand, I went on everyone's websites and had a read of the bio and about me. And I remember like first going onto yours, Simon, way back in the day when I first heard about you. And it's just like an encyclopedia of just all this epic shit that you've done in your life. And I'm like, it actually makes me like feel small in a way of like, how's he fit so much into his life? It's like, you've been here, been there, studied this, blah, 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 blah. Do you feel like I guess I'm curious, with having all of that under your belt, what validation that gave to be able to go and say like, here's my thing, you know, like, do you feel like that contributed, and how much do you put the importance of all these certificates and like teachers and just different ways of going like, yeah, I've got this on my list?
Yeah. Well, firstly, like obviously because I've done so many things, I'm really honestly not very good at any of them. Compared to anyone who specializes in any one of the things that even though I might have spent 5, 10, 15, 20 years on some of them, you know, compared to anyone who's a specialist in those things, I'm competent enough to have an educated conversation and to, you know, like I've put in some time. But when it comes to this idea of like creating my own thing, it's like I never set out to create a modality. You know what I mean? I'm sure all of us will agree that like what happened with me was like I had a burning sense of some stuff that I wanted to say and I wanted to talk about, which I didn't see anyone else in the whole world. No one was talking about what I wanted to talk about. And I was like, what about, you know, like spinal undulations and all these things? And I was like, what about like ancestry? What if all of these, you know, people are talking about like spontaneous movements that come out of meditation practice, and other people are talking about, you know, spirit possession, and other people are talking about repressed memories and all this stuff. And I was like, what if all of this stuff's contained in the body? And what if 4 billion years of evolutionary history are recorded in our nervous system, suppressed by culture? And what if there are ways to allow that stuff to emerge? Has anyone else thought about this? And like once I started talking about it, this amazing thing with the internet these days, people from like Croatia and Japan and Israel and South America, people start going, I've thought of that. I thought I was the only one, you know, and people start coming out of the woodwork, and then we get to talk about it and refine the language and all of that sort of thing. So for me, it was like, it was, and still is, a long process of not dabbling in all sorts of different traditions, although I do dabble. Obviously, I do a lot of dabbling, but going really deep into certain traditions and really, really, really deep. And then what starts to come out is like any of these old traditions, they start teaching themselves. So maybe it's Vipassana, maybe it's Taoist meditation, maybe it's whatever, but you start doing it and the process starts, and then it starts teaching you new things, and you have to try and come up with the language for what the process has started to bring out of your body.
Yeah.
And my background, educational background, was in evolutionary biology, human biology, anatomy, you know, ecology and anthropology, and then neuroscience. And so I was trying to describe, first of all, these experiences in the traditional language of Chinese practice and Taoism and the traditional language of yoga. But then I started to be able to find ways to describe it using Western scientific, neuroscientific, anatomical, physiological jargon. And I started calling it ancestral movement. And then, you know, 10 years later, now it's a modality. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I love is like when I was at your workshop, I came to a 2-day immersion, like listening to you talk about it. I loved the like ability to bring it back to like the Western jargon of it all. You know, it wasn't the super like etheric in what we're doing, going all the way back into ancestry. There was actually explanations, nothing that I could ever quote but to me, I was like, yep. Like it sounds 100% correct, and I just liked that certainty in it while I was doing something that is, quite ancestral, but now we've got these modern words to go alongside it, which is amazing. And just the healing of it essentially was the part of it, and the biggest part for me. And that's what I see with all three of you, is it's a healing modality in its own way. And I love that you say, like, you didn't intentionally come out to be like, I'm creating a modality, but among your thoughts and ways that you wanted to create it birthed itself. And one that I sort of see maybe a bit different with the spiral and Dancing Eros, I would say, is like it being a certain transformational process for you guys. Like it's like for Dancing Eros, it's like you go through these certain archetypes and there's a start and a finish, and same with the spiral, you go through the 7 chakras. There's a start and a finish, where ancestral movement, to my understanding, it's just something you continue to train at, and move into. There's no start and finish. And I believe with the spiral and Dancing Eros, it starts to create, for some people, when they look at it, like a magic pill enigma around it. Like, if I go through this process, I'm fixed for life. So I'm curious, Dane, starting off with you, like how you continue to reel that back and be like, no, this isn't gonna save your life, though it has helped a lot of people, but and you can continue to go through this process, but it is like, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you stop that enigma of this is going to change your life, as in forever, you will never have any shit again, but you will unravel a lot?
I mean, it's very different for me compared to me now, compared to me in like 2013. Because in 2013, I was like, this is going to fix your life.
Totally.
Just pay me the money and everything will be sorted. You'll be an enlightened being and you'll be rich. So just hurry up. And that was really effective until it wasn't, until it was like, okay, because I kind of, it's really interesting. I both resonate. And it's so interesting because I know both of these guys I've done a bunch of both of it, and I'm feeling into these 3 things we've each become custodians of, and on the surface, I think I probably would look like the most contrived or strategic, like I'm going to make a modality because that's the best way to do this thing. And it's a little more corporate, for want of a better word, or a little more structured in that way. But on the deep inside of it, I've had a fucking mystical journey with this thing, and I feel like it's become like me and Zephyria sitting at the center of this empty chamber going, okay, what does this thing fucking want from us? What is its point? What is it doing? Which is very different than the early days of like, right, I've successfully crossbred some things, which is going to be a newer, harder, faster. Literally, I wanted to make a magic pill, like, and so that thing you named, it's hilarious because we just finished practitioner training, and on either day 1 or day 2, I think it was day 2, which is, we're coming up. So we're level 2, which is emotions and connection and eros and so on. And I'm like, so look, we're all here now. I just got to break it to you. This thing's not going to make you happy, right? Like, you get that, right? And it's this kind of awkward ripple of like, I mean, if I'm fully honest, it's not even going to make you like better, like at a fundamental deep level, this is going to change so much stuff in terms of behavior and in getting certain patterns out of the way. But unless we deepen our ability to be with life in each moment, this thing is just an accelerator, right? And an accelerator is awesome. Like, it's really, really useful. But what I try to teach is that, essentially the magic of what the spiral, even the modality, I'm like, it's not even a modality. We just made a modality out of it. But like, it's kind of like, it's kind of like, you know, you've got PCs and then you've got the chip, you've got Intel or whatever, right? You've got fucking the chip type that powers PCs. Or like, I always use this Steve Jobs story where like they made computers and took them to the guy in the shop and they're just handing him a bunch of like motherboards and cables and shit. And he's like, what is this? They're like, this is our new computer. It's the best. Just sell them. They're going to sell like hotcakes. And he's kind of like, kids, like, unless you put a box on this and an interface and people can know what it is, they won't be able to use it. So they have to go back home and make these nice little shaped cases and keyboards and mice and shit. So it's like people can interface with the thing. So for us, a modality was just the best way to package up this fucking, you know, sometimes I think of it like a demon, you know, it's like I've handed a section of my life over to this demon, you know, and the demon is obsessed with transformation and change and acceleration and human consciousness unfoldment. But it's like this massive fucking thing that underlies, like, if you look at a spiral, it's in DNA, it's in the fucking structure of the galaxy, it's in all these things. And so it's like, what is it? It's like a kinesiology journey. And it's like, it's fucking super not that, but that's because when I landed it, what was I into? Kinesiology and coaching. I was like, oh, if you feed these into this spirally machine, this better version comes out. So we'll teach people that. Now that I've kind of been going deeper into like the esoteric core, it's really confusing for the new guys because we teach them, okay, on the one level, yes, you're learning a healing modality. That's what the spiral is. Step a level deeper, it's totally not that. And it's just like a sort of a map of the pathway of how things unfold. Which is, you can't sell that, but you can use that to get better at anything, you know, to understand, like, even in society, why things are happening. Well, we're in kind of a level 5, 6 shift right now. And that person has to talk to you that way because they're coming into their level 6. So now they're going to be a social justice warrior and tell you to use inclusive language and do this. And if you don't do it, you're bad, because they just came into that level and that's how it looks. And so it's just like a DNA map or something. And so what happens is you can tell people this, and I used to do this story about, okay, just don't try to clear everything, okay? Because it's going to like mess you up a little bit, you know? And they just have to go through it, you know? They just have to go through that journey, but what we teach is a lot more embodiment and a lot more self-reflective tools and a lot more other stuff that is like, this is the real shit that you kind of what both of these guys are teaching. But after we start destructuring some of your beliefs and patterns, your meditation is going to be easier to take your meditation path seriously. It's going to be easy to put your hands on your belly and tell me what's in there, because you don't have 58 patterns going, oh, I can't feel, you know. It's like, it's so, I try to teach it like that this is not the be all and end all. Most people figure it out too. Like, once you start engaging with it, you start to figure out, okay, this is good for taking the handbrakes off the vehicle. That's not the same as upgrading your car from a fucking Volkswagen to a Ferrari. Like, that's your own business, you know. Like, this is just a handbrake removal and friction removal system. So yeah, hopefully people get that as they come through the journey.
Yeah, cool. So it's more the beginning rather than like a thing that ends all.
Yeah
Cool. And Vanessa, I was reading your bio as well, your about me about us on Dancing Eros, and I love just the simplicity of it at the start of, like, I just wanted to dance sexy with all my girls every weekend, and then it eventually just turned in, I realized that I'm transforming through doing this. And I'm curious to know, like, where that sort of clicked in to go, oh, like, this sexy dancing is now actually a way for me to get in to move through my emotions and heal myself. And then furthermore to go, hey, I might start teaching this to, I'm assuming, a few of my friends, to eventually into a workshop, into blah, into now having people teach it to others where you don't even have to do it anymore. So I'm just curious where that little switch over happened to go, oh, here's something I can teach.
Well, I didn't put everything in that about us section because obviously it's a fucking big story, you know. But the piece that isn't in there, I suppose, is my own woundedness around my own confidence sexually, you know, which I think was actually driving some of my like interest in the tantra world and all of that. There was also like a part of my own like wounded little girl inside of that. And then I remember doing this like, and I was doing a bunch of stuff, and I would go to the workshops, and I remember I just kept thinking, why aren't they getting me to like dance sexy for them? Like, that's going to heal this. Like, I had this feeling that there was something about embodying my sexuality, being witnessed in it, and owning that was going to do something, but like no one was doing it in these workshops. And then I went to one where it was like a tantric striptease workshop or something, and it was fucking amazing. Like, it was like only a couple of hours of just like giving each other lap dances and shit, and I felt so good in myself. I felt so confident, and you know, I had like a lot of insecurities that I didn't feel like that, and I was like, this is fucking amazing, I want to do this more. And that kind of planted, I suppose, a seed for my own desire and need, like to become more confident in my feminine and in my sexuality. But I had no desire to I didn't think I had anything to give women. Like, honestly, I was working with dudes. Like, I was helping dudes pick up women. I was like in the seduction community. I was like doing coaching stuff for men. I was like, women, they're all like this goddess shit. Like, I don't know. I'm not like that. I just couldn't vibe. I just really had decided I have nothing to give women. Like, my medicine isn't a female medicine. And then life just kind of like pulled me. It's a whole other story in itself, where it was literally an afterthought that I put a workshop on the board at Confest, which is this hippie festival where you can put workshops on. I'd never done a workshop before. I'd done one, but yeah, anyway, whatever. So I put the workshop on for men, and I wrote it up, and it was like a really big deal. And then this woman just next to me was like, oh, do you want to do something for women? And I was like, yeah, all right, fuck it. Like, I've already, you know, made such a big deal. It was a really big deal for me to do this men's workshop. And the women's one just totally went off. Like, women were just like, just gagging. They like, I just got them to do the shit. Like, let's sexy dance, let's feel ourselves, all the stuff I needed. And they were like, oh my God, what is this? Like, you need to do this. And I was like, okay, like, fuck. I think that was a year later after that initial seed. So, you know, that's kind of how that started. And then I guess what I saw through the archetypes is the reality of like the level of trauma that exists in women around this stuff. It was like, oh wow, you know, like there's a lot here. It's not just like this illusion of like, yeah, just put on Beyonce and dance sexy. It's like, it's so fucking misguided. It's like to get to that point where you're truly like embodying pure, untainted, undistorted sexual energy is a journey. And there's definitely no promises that you can come to one journey and have that. Like, that's a training, that's a practice to unwind your distortions and conditionings around that, and the disconnection from the heart, the disconnection from your feeling and all the conditioning stuff that's there. So, yeah, I guess it really just like kind of revealed itself in a way, and the archetypes got deeper and deeper. More archetypes joined through my own journey, and also similar to what Dane said, like listening to what the organism itself wants, because it's like it's its own being. It's like it's its own spirit, and it, like, I feel when someone gives birth to a baby, that baby chooses that mother or that father to not only be like their own, that contract, but they heal their parents. And that's what I feel with this thing. It's like, you know, hey, like, now you're going to do this archetype. And I'm like, fuck, I'm going to do that archetype. I don't know that archetype at all. Oh my God. And it's like when the parent has a kid and the kid's like, I want to be a scientist. And they're like, a fucking scientist. Like, we want you to be an artist. You know, it's like,
we'll give it a second, see if she comes. If not, All right, I'm just gonna, maybe she'll jump in and back out. I'll just move to you, Simon. As like Dane and Vanessa have both explained around, like there's a big importance around the emotional embodiment and moving through these different parts of yourself and the conditioning. And I feel like this is a massive part of your work. And you have wrote about it in your bio, and you do speak about it a bit in the workshop that I went to, but I don't see it as your main focus. It's more just the embodiment, the movement, the isolation of these different parts. But on the other side of it, like it's happening, it's moving through. And I had like just a small tangent and funny story of like when I went through ancestral movement, and that was just 2 days, myself and 2 other people that were there had like massive like gay awakenings, which was
nice.
like, yeah, I guess I'm curious, knowing that, or maybe you do, but from my perspective, it's like you don't give a lot of importance to the like unpacking and the conditioning and the emotions themselves. Is that a conscious choice, or is that just something I've not even picked up on?
Yeah, so I mean, the 2-day workshops are really way too short, basically. And depending on who shows up and what the weather's like and what the venue's like and all those sorts of things, really wildly different things can end up being emphasized. So in some ways, ancestral movement, like, of course you can take it just as purely physical practice. We do parkour, we wrestle, we do, mobility and strength and climbing and whatever, all that sort of stuff, like move nat or natural movement, like whatever. But other times we have a huge emphasis on the emotional side, because the whole point of ancestral movement really, as well as like movement practice being good for you, breathing practice is good for you, meditation, relaxation practice is good for you, as well as all that, the main purpose of it is a way of deepening understanding of us, human life, and then through that, a deepening understanding of life itself, and through that gaining greater compassion, like gaining greater power, but greater compassion and reverence, like deepening that sense of miracle, of the miracle of all of life. But then one of the big things about it is that the great lesson of ancestral movement, the great lesson of understanding ancestry, hi Vanessa.
Hello Vanessa.
Is that there's no escaping from ancestry. We are, everything we do, everything that happens in every moment in the whole world is based on what happened the previous moment. Yeah? So everything that happens in this moment depends on what happened in the previous moment, and so on back to the beginning of time. And so we are all completely conditioned by our personal life history, by our genetics, by our family history, by our childhood experiences, by our culture, by absolutely everything. And there is no escaping from that. We can give little nudges in different directions so that we don't just become a slave to our ancestry, but you're a human being. Each one of us is a human being. We can't like have a moment of enlightenment and then be a horse. You know what I mean? It's like, you're still going to be a human being. You've still got your same genetics. You've still got all of that. So it's like, we're really working with conditioning. And then one of the things that I like to emphasize when it comes to like working with emotions and unpacking emotions and unpacking all of these things is like, my whole emphasis with ancestral movement is working directly with the body. So it's like, yeah, we can have names for all of these emotions. We can have names for these patterns, and like the archetypal stuff is absolutely huge. But the thing that I like to emphasize, because again, I like to teach, when I'm teaching, I like to emphasize the stuff that not everyone else is already teaching. You know what I mean? It's not that it's the best. It's that, look, there's heaps of this other amazing stuff which everyone else is teaching, but I want to emphasize some certain things. And what I emphasize with emotional work is working directly with the body. So let's say it's the pelvic floor, and we do 100 different movements to wake up every part of the pelvic floor. And then we do meditation practices where we're focusing our attention on the pelvic floor, maybe visualizing the pelvic floor breathing, maybe visualizing it warming and melting, maybe visualizing it like coming alive with energy, maybe sending love and reverence, and maybe sending kindness down to the pelvic floor, all of these different things. So we work with the area, we notice what comes up. How does it make me feel? Is it bringing up memories? Is there an emotional response? Is there a completely no emotional response at all, which is still an emotional response? You know what I mean? A numbness. And we do that with every little part of the body, the face, the throat, and not just the chakras, you know what I mean? Not just this point and this point and this point, but every single point in between, front and back, all the way through. Open them right up so that the body can take on all of these different shapes, so that the breath can move in every possible way, the spine, the throat, the voice. And we discover not just the archetypal emotions, but a whole palette of emotional coloring and mixing and memory and stuff, which, you know, we don't actually have a good enough language to describe.
Yeah.
But by working with the sensation and the body directly, we can get in there and make changes, discover what's there, and gradually sometimes make huge changes really quickly. Other times kindly and compassionately make gradual changes over the rest of our life. Yeah. So it's like sometimes, and this is also to get back to your question of, is that a conscious choice on my part? I find that working with the body directly gives us this amazing freedom when we do discover strong emotional stuff associated with different movement practices, different body parts, different social environments or whatever. We can then choose to work with it directly in the body and not go into the story. In a different context, maybe when we, you know, a different environment, different people or whatever, we can choose to go into the story. And then we have this body stuff that can help us work with the story at the same time. But then in another context, we can just work with the body, the breath, the mind, and not have to go into the story. And that can be an amazing gift for some people who are too caught up in rehashing, you know, the talk therapy and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, nice. I like that. I loved it personally, being there and just knowing, because it was a new language for me, like, and a new way of tapping into emotions where especially to the level of isolation, you know, because of I had through, like, as a practitioner of the spiral with Dane, like, I've learned so much around the different emotions and the different stories that we can work with, but I didn't know about all these different access points of, for instance, my spine, you know. And yeah, it's such a curious journey to see what can be moved throughout those. There's this infinite ways it just seems that we can really move through our different patterns, emotions, conditioning. And that's what's so cool about having everyone here, because we're all doing it a different way. And something that you said that was something I want to ask Dane about is, like, you said you try and not jump into what anyone else is teaching and trying to stay right in your lane. It sounds like you're saying, like, this is what I teach, and this is, I don't want to branch out too much because I know here and someone else can go into that. And for Dane, what I'm sort of curious about is, for someone that's been in your containers a few times, I know you go out and on these different adventures of learning from different people, such as like Ista or whatever it is, you know, you go do Simon's workshop or Dancing Eros, and you come back and you teach, and there's always this different version of the spiral that comes out. You know, there'll be the entrepreneur version of spiral, then there'll be the sex magic version of the spiral, like whatever flavor you've been brewing in as of recent, it just comes out, whether, I don't know if it's intentional or not. I'm curious to know, again, is that a conscious choice, or is it something that it just naturally comes out?
What's been interesting for me is, you know, I get bored really easily. I think a lot of creative and curious people do. And it's been a real challenged to stick with this one thing that I have strongly believed has value of being nurtured and taken to the world, even though like my natural personality thing is like, I want to teach something 3 times and never do it ever again. You know, it should be first time, see what it's like. Second time, round it out a little bit. Third time, put it in a box, teach someone else how to teach it and move on would be my natural type. Right. You know? But this one thing, you know, I've had such a commitment. I've tried to quit, you know, I've been like, oh, fuck this thing, you know, surely. And it's like, this thing has not been sufficiently delivered to the people that need it in the way that it needs to be done. But yeah, I go on my own journeys. And so part of it is I'm doing whatever stage of development I need to do. And you know, the way I relate to the spiral, which is deeper than the modality piece, is it's more of a context frame. It doesn't really have any content of its own. It's like an empty structure that can be used to understand things. And so, you know, in 2014, 13 to 14, the way I was teaching it was a lot more, it's just thoughts and emotions. That's all you need to deal with. I'm coming from like a coaching place, you know, and I'm coming from my own level of embodiment, which was not that I was quite emotionally aware by that stage, but I wasn't physically aware. And through then I went on a bit of an embodiment journey, you know, and some of Simon's stuff and some of James Scalcos's stuff. And I was in Vanessa's world, and I was in the Tantra world, and I was in getting into weights, and I was deepening my meditation. And so a couple of years of that happened, and it's like, for this to be effective, people need to be in their fucking bodies. They need to know how to breathe properly. They need to know how to, like, you know, so it became then about anchoring this thing. Like, okay, yeah, it's super great for like recomputer programming yourself, but the system's constraint on that is going to be your nervous system. You know, the intelligence of your nervous system is going to, and I noticed like athletes and stuff, they would shift stuff real quick once their emotional intelligence caught up, you know, but say someone who's been really fucking sedentary for a long time, maybe their emotional awareness develops, but their body awareness is fucking terrible. There's a backlog on their process, you know? So then I went through a stage of embodying the spiral, and then I went down more the ritualistic path for a while. And then it was like, well, I want to keep myself fucking entertained. If we're going into my containers, they're going to be super magically fucking charged, because that's what I'm into right now, you know? And then sexuality and open relationships was the kind of big theme. So I was like, okay, I don't really want to teach that to my practitioners, but it's interesting because now this room is 50% full of open relating Tantra people. And when our American Salt Lake City friends came over and everyone's romping around and rolling all over each other on the breaks, they were like, oh my God, what is this? A sex cult? I think it just takes on my flavor when I'm teaching, but because it's sort of an empty context machine, you can do that with it, you know? So I don't know if that even answers whether there is kind of an intention around that, but there's also just like, I've got to keep myself entertained. And, you know, on an entrepreneurial level, I've been gradually leveraging myself out of all the entry level containers. So I will not teach them very soon, but that's taken me a long time to get organized enough to do, and to also get humble enough to do, because there can be this kind of construct of I'm the only person that can teach the thing, which is, and now I have a much more of a systems approach, which is like, actually, that's not true. Like many people can teach many bits and pieces of this, and more of where I've started to concentrate on acquiring mastery is how do we create a container where the container teaches, rather than is the person, the teacher sitting at the front, good enough. It's like, it doesn't matter if the field that people step into is charged enough and there's numerous competent people in that field, and there's a set of agreements and rules that are set up around, like, you know, assumptions around how quick we can learn, you know. So basically I've shifted from trying to be the guy to trying to create a culture that teaches the cool stuff. And I feel like now that that's happening, it will less be about, okay, there's a super sexy flavor because Dane's in a sexual journey stage, or there's a super financial flavor because Dane's in his investment stage. It's just more like the field and the culture and the systems that we've created transmit the teaching and the awakening and the intellectual understanding and the embodiment, rather than that guy sitting on the chair at the front or standing at the front. So I don't know if that really answers your question or not, but that's my current relationship to that, to how stuff gets transmitted.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm curious to hear how it goes, like, because it sounds like each of these pieces actually help the spiral grow. Like you said, you learned about embodiment, so people are going to move through it. And then obviously there's that, like, fuck, someone else can't teach it like I can, but what's it going to add when, say, for instance, Zephyria takes her own journey with it, and what elements are going to be added to the... It's
epic, and I've seen, I think for me, I've had a big shift in, this is very Haydn Temple influenced archetypal astrology language, but from a Piscean leadership model to an Aquarian leadership model has been a big thing that's going on for us behind the scenes. And it's like, this is about supporting multiple leaders to rise up and lead, and each of those people, well, one, if you've got good systems and quality and standards, then the teaching is good enough. That's from my kind of entrepreneur brain. I don't really care about perfection. I'm much more of train myself to filter for good enough, and when, it's like a jiu-jitsu, like if you get to blue belt level, it's not that you're a perfect anything, but you are good enough to represent that standard, and you roll with blue belts and they're up and down, but they're all definitely better than white belts for the most part, and so finding our versions of that has been really big. But also transferring my mentality, because even though I might not have deliberately built a modality at the very beginning, I definitely deliberately had I want to permeate and penetrate the far corners of the world. Like I'm very like that. So I want to fucking reach all the people that need to be reached. And there's been a big transference to me to go, the way to do that isn't like one person reaching lots, or it's about raising up leaders, it's kind of been, my focus has moved to that a lot more in recent times.
Hectic. Yeah, well, that's I love that it is spreading, and I see it because we were having a discussion about this earlier, but it's been able to diversify with more teachers and practitioners in it, with who actually gets involved, because now it's just outside of your certain community. And a community is a massive part of all of these that I see. Is like there's certain hubs around the spiral, Dancing Eros, and ancestral movement. Or just continuing the conversation, something I really want to move into is that part of learning from different modalities and cultures, and like especially, we started off with you, Simon, talking about just all the people that you learn from, and maybe you're not the best, but you did become a student, and within all the practices, to my understanding, all of you are borrowing from certain cultures and modalities, people, whatever it is. I'm curious to know if you ever come up against any sort of allegations of cultural appropriation from others, or even yourself within your modality.
Yeah, interesting question. Like like I was saying at the start, before I kind of, came out of hiding and openly started saying, look, here's the stuff that I think is really interesting, which was all my personal practice for like more than a decade. But what I was teaching up until that point was super traditional yoga, capoeira Angola, Chinese, like Qigong and martial arts. And like I was teaching just like how my teachers taught me for years. And then in my yoga teaching, it started to change as I went back and was just really deeply studying traditional texts myself. But then when I was teaching yoga, I would be teaching and I would always be saying, look, this is from this traditional text. And then once I started going right down the neuroscience rabbit hole, I'd be like, look, this is what it says in the traditional text. Here's a neuroscience angle on it. What about this? And so when I was teaching yoga, I was always really quite an anal hard ass. Dane used to come to my yoga classes, and he'll know, I'd be like, this is a yoga class. We're not here for stretching. If you want to do a fun movement class, I do heaps of like all sorts of crazy movement stuff, but this is a yoga class. We're going to be doing yoga. So rather than making a new kind of yoga, you know what I mean? I'd be like, no, yoga is a specific thing traditionally. And so, you know, same for lots of the things. And so I really like, I've got a really, really deep respect for traditional practices. And I still, 20 years on, am still practicing within several traditions, just like how I was taught. Just the basics based on the traditional texts, based on how I learned from my teacher. But then once I started teaching my own stuff, like pretty much everything you did in the workshop you came to was stuff that I came up with.
Nice.
So it's like, for me, it's like I've lived in like, you know, India and Japan and China and Taiwan and Brazil and all these different places. And every place I've been, I've sought out the most interesting teachers I could find and really gone as a dedicated student and learned from the beginning, worked my way through. And so now when I teach, it's like, obviously everything I teach is totally influenced by all of these amazing teachers that I've had, but virtually none of what I teach is taught in the way that those teachers taught me. And part of the reason for that is because I'm able to get people to experience in one afternoon shit that it took me 20 years to work out. And it didn't have to take me 20 years. That's what kind of annoys me. And that's part of why I started teaching my own stuff, was like, it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not saying that I'm a better teacher than any of these people that I learned from. It's just that some, you know, there's some things which the traditional process works really well for. And there's other things where that you can find a shortcut. And then, you know what, you think you've found a brand new shortcut, and then you go deep enough into the tradition and you discover, of course, they were doing that as well. I was just messing around on the surface of this tradition. I didn't have a long enough, deep enough time with my teacher, or I was going 2 times a week instead of spending 3 hours a day, or you know what I mean? So it's so I really try when I teach to touch on how maybe we're doing something which might have some similarities to Haitian folkloric dance and ancestor spirit possession. It might have some similarities to some practices and things that I've either seen or discussed or read about in Indigenous Australian cultures. It might have, you know, and I might be like, here's how they describe it in this yoga system. Here's how they talk about it in Theravada Buddhism. Here's a neuroscience angle. And I try to acknowledge all of these different streams of culture. And I try to emphasize what I think maybe they were trying to get at in some cases, and then describe each of the cultural practices as a beautiful manifestation or expression of this thing which I consider to be possibly innate and ancestral. You know what I mean? So I really try really hard personally not to appropriate, while at the same time doing my best to acknowledge the huge influence that these different cultures have on the work that I practice and teach.
Yep. Yeah, I guess like I love that, you know, if you've come from something that's so traditional, such as yoga, and sticking exactly to the straight and narrow to be able to create your own, it must be such a journey. Do you feel like you butt heads sometimes on like, oh fuck, it'd just be so much easier if I just snuck this one in, you know, and just gave it to the people?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why, like, you'll notice, like, if you've come to some of my stuff, all of you have come to some of my stuff, we actually do shitloads of yoga, but it doesn't look like what people think of as yoga. Because in my sort of, you know, elitist way of looking at things, we're doing some of the stuff that I'm teaching is actual yoga. Whereas the stuff that people think of as yoga is like stretching exercise and whatnot. And so like, we sneak in heaps of yoga, but by not calling it yoga, I get around that butting heads. Because back when I taught yoga, man, I spent so much energy week after week butting heads with people who were like coming wanting to learn something, and I'd be like, but that's not yoga. This is a yoga class. And we'd have to have this annoying argument about what's really yoga, and I'm bringing up traditional this and that, and they're being like, oh look, I just want to do a vinyasa, whatever. And it was killing me, man. It was killing me. I hated it. And now I do all this stuff, and I'm super deep into my yoga, but like I don't get invited to yoga events anymore because people now think that I'm a movement guy.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's like I guess that's again part of this thing of just doing your own thing and calling it something different is it gets you out of those arguments with people who are doing something else and want to tell you it's not right the way you're doing it.
Do you feel any pressures like when you are doing, for instance, like if you give these certain yoga movements, embodiments throughout your course where you're not calling it yoga because to the majority of the people that are there wouldn't even notice that it is yoga, i.e. me, is like, do you feel any pressures that you've got to justify it in any way in your own internal or external validation?
Justify what? Justify
like for instance, like you just did borrow from that modality. Is there anything like, fuck, is that the battle of like, oh, is that appropriating if I don't say anything, or if I don't blah, like give a donation to here or whatever it is that people use as their way of being like, this makes me feel okay with using this?
Yeah, that is a good question. So for example, like I haven't been teaching capoeira for a long time. And when I used to, it was like, you know, just through a little local club, and like I never really charged money for it. But I'm actually really craving it. And so I'm living in Mullumbimby now, and there's not a Capoeira Angola group here, and I want to like start up a new one. And it's like, well, you know, I need to charge money for things now. But Capoeira Angola, for those who don't know, is the like really traditional African capoeira style from the state of Bahia in Brazil. And my capoeira teachers are like really poor, you know what I mean? And like the people of Bahia are like, it's the most African state of Brazil, where it's like 95% black African Brazilians, which also means it's the poorest state in Brazil, strongest African culture, strongest Afro-Brazilian culture, but like massive poverty, and you know, all that sort of stuff. And so it's like, well, me going like, okay, so if I do start teaching capoeira, then I kind of feel like I should set aside a percentage of whatever. If I'm using it to make a living, that's totally fair because I've got to make a living, but I feel like I should be giving back. You know what I mean? So yeah, I do really like that aspect of like, of giving back. Especially, you know, when we learn people, like all of the things I've learned, India, China, Brazil, like they're poor countries, you know what I mean? So I am really into that, but that's the part of the thing of, again, of when I teach is like the stuff that I teach mostly on retreats, it's a bit different because we do a big mix of everything, but in workshops and lots of the stuff, it's stuff that it's really my way of teaching, you know what I mean? Like you won't find that stuff anywhere else. You might find some similar stuff, but it's like, that's stuff that I've come up with over decades of work and the way of explaining it as well. So it's like, I'm not teaching like people a whole yoga process, but I'm teaching an explanatory model and an embodiment model, which then will allow, ideally, you to go on and learn any tradition of meditation, any tradition of whatever these sorts of things are. And you'll have this really deep, grounded sense of your own body and a simple explanatory model, which will help you understand those things and learn them better. That's kind of my goal. So I don't want to set myself up as the meditation teacher or whatever, but I can set myself up as like, here's how meditation works physiologically. Do these practices with me, which I've come up with. And that will then help you understand any of the practices that you'll learn in any of these traditions. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. I love that. I need to I already know I have to go back and listen to that again to like fully digest where, because what I'm hearing more so for you is like,
I'm still here, Reese.
yeah, that you're like getting the neuro patterns out of each modality and understanding it on a different complex level and wanting to, I guess, like reiterate it to the people that are around you from what you've learned from it, and then represented it in a way that feels best to your body. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, like a way of like you can take it from a certain culture,
mm-hmm.
and then you can present it in a way which is working, like which doesn't require the cultural language, and it's just presented in terms of the body itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go with the body itself and your experience of it, then you can try to use that as a way to translate what you're doing in
mm-hmm.
the specific cultures from whichever mm-hmm. culture you're trying to work with. Of course, if I'm trying to say that it's not cultural what I do, obviously that's bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just not me describing it, because I could describe it to you in the language of Taoism and traditional Chinese medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But unless I know that you've got a strong background and you speak Chinese, conversational Chinese, as well as Chinese medical Chinese,
mm-hmm.
unless you've got that educational background, then we're just using these words and there's so much confusion. So at least I can translate it into English and into the body and help you experience your body directly.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can agree on some language, and then maybe that'll help you talk with other people who aren't in the Chinese medicine world or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So how I'm hearing it is sort of like, it's like if I threw myself in a really cold lake, I would probably come up with a breathing modality, because of my body would naturally know how to breathe through it if I was present enough. And this is sort of like, and then if I came out and taught that, I'm sure it would be a version of some kind of breath work, but it's the natural body mechanism of me understanding breath work as just a human being.
And that's the whole point of ancestral movement, is like, there's these innate abilities which all of us have, and different cultures express them in different ways, or actively suppress them in different ways.
Cool.
But I guarantee someone would tell you that you stole it off Wim Hof.
Yeah, I shouldn't have used the cold lake as an example. Look, let's take it back. There's another example. But yeah, for you, Dane, what's your relationship with cultural appropriation as like one of the main sticks of the spiral is going up through the chakra system? And I guess what's been your experience around, if anyone has tried to call you out on it?
Look at Simon's face.
Okay, Simon has instigated this from you before. Let's hear what you told him.
I make donations to Simon as an inheritance, and I feel okay about that. Look, you know, it's really interesting because I think that I'm respectful, but compared to Simon, I'm like a pirate, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm good with that, you know? I've never really had much conversation about it until last week, where Mira brought up the whole cultural appropriation of the chakra system. And for me, I'm filing that conversation in the under inquiry category. And I'm going to say this here, and probably someone will hate this, you know, but I don't think anyone can own ideas and maps. And it's interesting with the chakra system, because obviously there's a huge colonial story with Britain and India, and a lot of shit being taken and exploited. And so now, you know, I didn't even learn about chakras from a person, you know. I just knew there were 7, and just started muscle testing different stuff, and started getting responses that later on, when I started picking up books, were like, hey, these books, which I now would regard as like pretty fluffy new age chakra system stuff, which has been multiple times changed, borrowed, bastardized. But at the time I was like, whoa, these books say the same as what I found in my body. And so for me, you know, I have a different vision around how I want to contribute in the world, and what I'm looking in terms of building foundations and where profit benefits from profits can be channeled to contribute to things that I think need to be contributed to. And this is a big global level conversation, and there's racial categories and there's environmental categories and all that stuff, you know. That's my virtue signal complete.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm really interested in is accelerating human development. And, you know, it really what's the main practical issue is that people who are coming from a more kind of green meme left-wing background are going to bring up annoying chakra conversations in my container. I just change it to numbers if that's going to be what happens. You know, if that becomes an increasing thing where everyone is trying to rectify everything by complicated political ideology stuff, I'll just fucking move past it. I'll just change the system so we don't have to have those conversations, which maybe that sounds really fucking cold and exploitative and sort of capitalistic, but I just think it's more practical than, like, you know, this whole thing is so complex. And I'm just thinking of my work like I'm a software programmer, you know, and I've borrowed the best code that works in other situations, and I'm trying to refine it and make it better and make it more useful so that it can essentially reduce people's suffering and accelerate people's ability to create and get what they want in their lives. So that's like my number one objective. And it's only now that I'm anyone that kind of sort of gets in the way of that, I'm like, I used to just be like, fuck you, you know, fuck off. Like now I'm gradually grounding and dropping defense around that and being like, okay, well, I would want to also not cause harm by what I'm creating. I guess that's the part that I care about. I think a lot of conversations around cultural appropriation, you know, it's usually like some white chick with blue bits in her hair that's trying to like cause just get in status beefs and stuff like that. And I think it's really difficult to separate pure humanitarianism from like ideological warfare, which I think is a lot of what's going on, you know, especially like conversations around, you know, if we're using a 7-stage model that is anchored in the body, that has a number of different references anchored to it, maybe what's getting pointed out is it's actually not that accurate to call it purely the chakra system. Maybe we should just move away from that language, you know, rather than be like, oh, we donate to a number of Indian causes because we like using the word chakra and we feel really bad that our ancestors were cunts in some ways, but not really my ancestors, more like the people who owned the factories that my ancestors worked in. You know, it's very, there's a lot of narratives involved, and some of them I don't really buy. Like, I don't really buy the structure of group attributable guilt, but I do buy that you can hurt people with the language and the concepts you use. So it's like balancing those two out. Yeah. And then everything else that I've borrowed, mostly it's from contemporary systems and contemporary individuals. So it's pretty easy to say, hey, you should go and learn NLP. It's really useful. I mean, they all took too much coke and their thing kind of imploded, but I've took the best bits out of that. And here's how I think that's useful. And here's what so I do a lot of, here's where we got this from. If you want to go down the real tantric yoga path, these are the people I recommend. And, you know, so it's like the most ethical bit I feel that I do in my system is attribution, you know, but it's as much as like a marketer and an idea remixer. And I guess my whole philosophy is informed by hip hop, which I appropriated as a white 13-year-old in the white suburbs, trying to not be like the other white kids and finding my own thing. Right. But really, particularly in like 80s graffiti culture, the idea is you don't bite other people's shit. So even though there's numerous styles emerging and you can emulate a style and borrow that style and build from it, one, you acknowledge it, and two, it's your duty to go beyond it and continue to like create something new. And that, you know, is it in Beat Street? This is my defense is based on like 80s hip hop films, which is really not going to stand in a lot of people's conversations. But, you know, the idea that if you bite something, it's like you don't understand the whole, you know, you didn't grasp the overarching culture and system that this came from, and you just took what you wanted. And for me, anything that is a kind of a pillar or a backbone of what we're doing, I feel like I've gone fairly deep into it. But then there's little bits and pieces that I'll borrow from fucking everywhere, and it's like, I don't know. It basically would it be more useful for me to worry about that, or would it be more useful just to get on with refining what I'm doing and serving more people and making what I'm doing more authentic and more aligned, you know? And that's a question that's gonna sit. But I quite like Joe Dispenza's work, and it's interesting because you could see this as more dodgy in a way. You could come at this as like, this guy is just a cultural appropriator who hides the bodies, you know? But what he's been very thorough in doing in his meditation and energetic systems that he's teaching is he's just replaced it all, and I'm sure Simon loves this, with sciencey sounding language, you know, which is some of the science I think is good, and some of the science I'm like, that's not science, Joe. But the systems, the practices are really fucking powerful. But no one's going to have that argument in his container where it's like, well, this is called the blessing of the energy centers meditation, you know? And there's 2,000 people doing this thing where they're all fucking getting high as fuck and altering their reality and producing epic results. We're not worrying about, is this white person pronouncing like Svadhisthana properly, you know? We're just like, well, now move up to the second energy center, which is situated here. And he's more locating using glands and body position and whatever. I fucking probably think that's where we'll go in the spiral ultimately, you know, just because this whole debate, I think, is going to waste a lot of people's time and energy and have people arguing over shit that isn't really making the world a better place.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm curious, for instance, like as you've collected more practitioners, there's been more people of color involved, which means their communities are being reached out to and it's spreading. But when it comes to the conversation of appropriation, if we look at chakras, is like, yeah, it's good and well for someone like me who's been through the spiral and I've had massive growth and it's helped me a lot. But if you want to heal the world, and somewhere like India is somewhere that's like needs the most healing, where there's so much poverty, and then the spiral starts to dominate everywhere and it gets there and they're like, no way, I'm not going through this because he's using a system of ours and we gain nothing. He wants us to pay for this thing.
But that's like from a pure where I am strong, which is an understanding of trends, language, business. That's never going to happen. Like, and fucking everything has come from somewhere else, you know? And I think, you know, I'm meeting Indian people from India, not Aussie Indians, but Indian people flying to Australia and New Zealand to go deeper with tantric teachers that they think are legit. And like, why? Well, I've got my guru and I've got this, but Bruce, I want to work with him because I fucking know. And it's like, that's a very interesting situation to be in. But so what I feel is a lot of these conversations, they're more important to people with a political or an identity politics ideology than they are to individuals who want to change something. Like, that's my current opinion. You know, it's like if someone wants a certain result, if they want to engage with something and they feel good about that thing, or they feel good about that organization, or they feel good about the person teaching, that's not going to be a huge not milestone. What's the other thing? Millstone, barrier. It's not going to probably get in the way, I don't think, for a lot of people.
Cool.
I could be proven wrong on that, but that's, you know, I've taught chakra stuff to Indian people and not really had that conversation much until lately. And what I'm seeing is this conversation is not coming up because of cultural appropriation. It's coming up because of epic systemic racism, which then is being exposed, and then there's all these little subsidiary branches, and it's like, I don't know that's where to spend the energy of that fight and that change, but this could be sampled and I could be made to look like a very bad white man.
Well, we'll see.
Again.
But I love the ability to have the conversation, because not a lot of people are equipped enough to have the conversation. Even people that are at the beginning of their journey, might not know how to really look at these certain topics and understand where they sit with themselves, because there's so many ideas going around, what's right, what's wrong, pointing the fingers, not wanting to do something because they don't understand their culture or who to connect with or what these systems do and where they're from. And I think I fully hear you on the, you don't mostly understand that, it's not going to go to India into the slums. The spirals is not going to.
Oh, I think it is. No, I fully disagree. I think it is. I don't think that the fact we use the idea of a chakra would be a huge problem. If anything, that would be an advantage.
Okay, got you.
It's like, this has something that and you might have to translate or upgrade or bridge that bridge so that it connects to that particular group of people's understanding of what that is, because I'm sure it's mutated 500 million times to get to where we are.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would be a problem. My main concern with that stuff is white kids trolling me on Facebook. That's where I think the biggest dramas of me reaching millions of people would be, of this guy stole from an disadvantaged culture. That's really where it is. Not, do I think it would prevent Indian people from using that system? I don't think that's at all would be an issue,
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Vanessa, let's see if you're intact.
See.
What archetype are you in?
I'm not robot archetype. Left the building.
All right, great. No, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good.
So in that manner of inclusivity, I love that it's from what I've tracked with Dancing Eros, as it started off for women, even though you said beforehand you're working with men, and then you created this modality for women, and then you started to introduce men. And to my understanding, not too long ago, you've introduced a man as a practitioner. If that's right, Arion Light, is he a practitioner for you guys?
He's not. Well, he was. Yeah, that process was interesting, but we just announced our first official one 2 days ago.
Cool.
Arion was kind of coming in and dancing and flirting with that a little bit, but he kind of had his own shit to do, so that didn't happen. But Sean's come in and is facilitating the next journey with Lara, and it's really our first time that we've had a man and a woman teaching the feminine on equal seats, because before, what we had is what I totally inappropriately named the mansplainer, which Dane was one of them at one point. And we've had a few men, which is okay, I'm the female facilitator transmitting the feminine, and we're going to have a guy here to translate if what I'm saying is not landing for you. So I called it the mansplainer, because I just find all that stuff just fucking stupid, to be honest. It's I love men so much, and any kind of demonizing of their masculinity I'm not interested in. So I wanted to kind of tweak that term being a bad thing. I'm this is our mansplainer. He's going to explain to you male shit. So we've had a lot of mansplainers, and then Arion kind of came, and then Arion came in as well, and was very much a part of really supporting Eros, and also being kind of stepping a little bit more. But we've never had equal male woman facilitators splitting the money, splitting the teachings. We've never had that until this next journey, which is going to be Sean and Lara, which is super cool. So yeah, it's been a big journey to have men receive the feminine work and now teach the feminine work, it's been a big journey for sure. And I believe there's lots of like even on ancestry stuff, there's literal ancestral memory of women being like, get the fuck out of the temples. We do not trust those men who are going to come in and fuck with us and going to burn all the books and, you know, destroy the goddess culture. Like there's literally, I've felt that process happen over the past couple of years of like almost like gates of trust of like, no, actually we can trust men. Men have a feminine as well. This gender divide is not something that we have to take into the future, but you can't also rush that process and the delicacy of that process and unwinding personal wounds and then ancestral wounds and a whole bunch of shit there. So I feel like we've kind of actually just that process is getting more and more healed and whole, for want of a better goal-orientated term.
Yeah, well, I found it, you know, where I was in my journey when I went through Dancing Eros to be embodying feminine archetypes and owning them as my own rather than this is a thing that women go through. I'm curious to like hear if you have any thoughts on like moving towards non-binary or even just including more non-binary people into your containers in a manner of like, it seems like there's a dissolving of what man and woman is through these kinds of containers. And it does leave us in a sort of genderless body by the end of something like Dancing Eros.
Yeah, I think it's highly likely that is going to happen. And where I sit with it, you know, which again is through my own experience, is that process can't be rushed, and you can't deny the importance and the conditioning of gender. Right? Yep. There's something that happens there, and I mean, it'd be fucking awesome if we had like someone who just doesn't identify that with all. We have had a few like transgender people, like people who don't identify with that, come into the journeys before, but not many, because I'm aware I do hold that more of a frequency of heteronormative, you know, that is something that is my own bias. And I guess, there's something that's like, okay, I have a responsibility to break that bias and make it more inclusive, but I also can only speak from my own experience. Like I feel like I've got to be in my lane. People have got to be in their lanes. If someone wants to create a non-gender binary course, fucking go and do it. Like, awesome. If that's your passion, if that's what turns you on, like full support of that. You know, I think if there's too much kind of martyrdom in our creations where it's like, oh, I'm here to serve the world. Like, I actually am not here to serve the world. Like, I'm not. I'm here to be my most activated, alive, impassioned self, to support other people to be their most impassioned, alive, activated selves. And, you know, I get that can be a triggering thing for some people, but I truly believe if there's too much martyrdom and like, okay, well, I better do that so everyone's included and I need to just stop saying man or woman. It's like, it starts to head fuck my own, where I can really serve, which I feel is just being fucking alive, you know. And then people go, wow, you can be alive. It's like, yeah, what does your aliveness want you to create? If that's what your purpose and your soul is here to do, is to support people to completely abolish gender as a construct that's, you know, illusionary, which some people believe. I don't believe gender is an illusionary construct personally. I have a vagina, you guys all have penises. That, I believe, still needs to be honored within the context of, we do have an inner masculine and feminine, absolutely. But I still feel that there's something about gender that I personally don't yet have a full openness to completely leave behind. And I think in that journey of getting to that point where you're like, wow, yes, we all do have feminines and masculines and we can shift that. You have to kind of start with like, okay, and what's your shit with being a woman? What's your shit with having a womb and ovaries? What's your shit with having a penis and balls? And like, what has been come into you conditioning wise? What is it physiologically as well? Like, what is that? And to respect that. So, you know, that's, yeah. And I get some people won't be into that. And it's like, cool, I'm not for you. Like, that's fine. Like, it's not, yeah. So I have, I guess, less of an altruistic, like, I want Eros to change the face of the world. Like, I really have dropped all of that, to be honest. I'm just like, I'm just here doing my thing, having my fucking journey. Everyone's doing their journey. All right. You know, like, I can't hold the weight of that I'm here personally to fucking start some global revolution. Like, God, no. That's just too much pressure.
Yeah, I think there's a certain beauty in sorry,
I don't claim to be that.
Yeah, wonderful.
No, it's fine. I'm complete. You go.
Can I riff on that a little?
Yeah.
I think, because obviously I know Vanessa very well on this journey, and I feel like both of us had a bit of that in, say, 2013, was like, I'm going to fucking change the world, you know? And some of that can be healthy, but I have found actually the more of that I've dropped, the more practically I can actually serve people, you know, one at a time, 10 at a time, 100 at a time, 1,000 at a time, rather than like, I've got to get this to billions. It's like, do you though? Does everyone want this? Are you going to shove it down their throat, or are you just going to create something and improve that thing and let the people that want it find it? And I think that I have experienced that journey as a maturing, and it's, you know, it's interesting because in some areas there's a decrease of ego and arrogance, but in others there's like a dialing up of like, and I also know what I'm capable of. So it's like a dropping some of the really pie in the sky stuff, but then finding that there's a certainty of like, and we can make a big fucking impact with this if we want. Having dropped the obligation, delusion, the fucking world needs you. You know, my biggest perception is the world is actually fine. Many individuals, many groups, many situations are fucked, are struggling, are trying to get somewhere. But the whole thing, even if we go bigger than the world, the whole fucking, whether you want to call it the soul of the planet, or even we give to chunk a level bigger to like the galaxy's doing fine. You know, and even the planet is doing fine in the macro scale, you know? And so like the idea for me that a human has to try to fix that is a little bit delusional, but I can clean up my reality and my behavior and my alignment in many, many ways. And I can share that on this little local level and so on and so on. But you know, for me, I think and talk a lot about sort of spiritual business and contribution through business, and even beyond business from the art form or what systems that are getting created. But the less I'm trying to fix anything, the better it seems to go, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a massive importance in the ability to go like, I accept and I encourage anyone that's doing this, you know, helping up this minority, this group of people, but I know that's not my area that I'm in. I think there's an importance in that as well, because we all can't save everyone at once. And
I don't think anyone can save anyone. I want to make a much more, I feel like there's a whole rescuer paradigm of like, no one's fucking saving anyone, you know? Absolutely. You can serve people, you can support people, you can extend fucking love, and not just energetically, not just my prayers, like in the form of resources, in the form of action, of whatever. But I think the whole savior concept it's good to go. That's why we're fucked, you know. That's why you've got a Donald Trump right now. That savior didn't work. Let's take a more radical, risky version. Okay, let's make a more insane bet that one man can save. Oh, that bet didn't work at all. projection and giving away of power and authority that is delusional, in my opinion.
Well, that's, I guess. Oh, sorry, go Simon.
Oh, I was just going to say something that I've noticed, like, when you got us together starting the conversation with talking about like creating a new system or whatever, of like, oh, you're bringing something new, and like, how does that happen and whatnot. I sometimes feel like, and now talking about the cultural appropriation, and then, wanting to change the world, and this like process of maturing as a practitioner, if you like. One thing I've sort of noticed is like that, like, often it's in those initial years that you have this like explosion of your ego, and you massively appropriate from all different cultures, thinking that you fully understand what you think you're an expert, and actually you're a total noob. And you look to anyone who knows what they're doing, you look like an idiot. You look like a straight up idiot. Like it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? You're too shit to know what an idiot you look like. But one of the things that I find really interesting in this is that it's often in that initial phase when you are a total noob, you are a Dunning-Kruger thinking you're an expert when really you're not. But your ego's exploded, and often people are really prolific in that period, and they just smash it. They're like, the world needs me. The world needs this. I'm going to do it. And so in some ways, I kind of feel like, despite my natural tendencies, I feel like we should almost encourage people in that phase to be like, be prolific, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure, because it's like, yeah, you're culturally appropriating, you're doing all this stuff, and like, you look like an idiot, mate, and like all that kind of thing. You kind of want to help them mature. But the problem is, if you mature before your prolific phase, then you're going to be way more cautious, way more nuanced, way more all of this stuff. And it actually makes it harder to just put out lots of work.
100%.
So I'm still in two minds, like I used to hassle Dane all the time about being like, no, the way you're saying it's not good enough. And like, that's not true what you just said. And like, oh, you're teaching chakras, but how deeply do you understand them, and all that sort of stuff. But it's like, he was burning, sorry to use you as an example.
It's great. It's awesome.
He was burning to bring this stuff out. And then year by year by year, pretty much every year, Dane does a Facebook post where he criticizes the previous year's Dane in more or less exactly what I was thinking about that year's Dane. But that's the thing, is like, I think it's only a worry in people where 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, where they haven't matured. Then it's like, that's really bad. If they're still doing those same things, then I think that's a sign of like a kind of disease. Whereas it's like, no, they're starting out, they're making all of those classic mistakes, and they're doing the work, doing their practice, and producing material. Then it should work itself out, because you can't be an expert on everything and a flawless individual when you start,
Yeah, me and some friends, whenever we're like in ritual and we're like focusing on one person within their art or whatever they're doing, we always wish them confidence to the point of delusion, as a way of like, because we're so like at times like knowing what we've got to, what our boundaries are, what this is, that part of you that if you miss out on that point of prolific ignorance, where you really shoot through, now we've got all these systems in places and what's right and what's wrong. It's like, but here's a little sprinkle of confidence to the point of delusion, just to get you through any of the bullshit that might hold you back. And I like the idea of like everyone talking about, it's gone past the point of themselves and this savior complex, and it's birthed into this modality that has its life of its own, and it goes out and connects with people in their certain way and helps them in a nourishing relationship. Simon, I'm curious, one, do you have any practitioners of ancestral movement?
I've never run a teacher training. Maybe I will eventually. What I have is like a number of people who have worked with me extensively over years, and they each have their own backgrounds and their own you know, life experience and passions that like allow them to use stuff they've learned from me and use it in their own work. So like our good friend James Skalkos, who, you know, all of us here knew James really well, and, you know, really miss him, I'm sure.
Yes.
So James was one of those people who, like, you know, he came to events of mine, and then he was able to like I'd see him listening, and because he asked me, he was like, can I teach some of this stuff with some of the work I'm doing? And I was like, sure. And then because he was planning to teach, he would like sit, and while I was talking, he'd be like laser focus. And then he'd go and he'd teach, and like he'd be, you know, reciting whole extended spiels of mine, like word for word, and like fully going in. You know, so James was one who was able to channel a lot of the stuff, which, again, because a lot of the stuff that I teach, I'm saying it's innate in human beings, right? So it's like, well, I don't own that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I can do that's really useful is provide some exercises and some language which help people to understand all of these things which come through all of us given the appropriate circumstances. You know, in some people that's psychedelics, in other people that's certain kinds of music, in other people that's certain kinds of mind, you know, meditation and breathing, whatever, but stuff starts coming through. And so, you know, James was able to use that. I've got several other friends, like Mira Melaleuca has been mentioned. Quite a number of my friends teach a lot of the work that they've come through me, but they don't call themselves ancestral movement teachers. But maybe they facilitate dance, ecstatic dance practices, and they include, here are some practices from ancestral movement. You know what I mean? So it's like, like I find it really interesting and inspiring listening to, like, you know, Dane and Vanessa talking about like allowing the work to flow through other people. And I would really like to take ancestral movement in that direction. And it's sort of like you almost have to streamline and minimize, right? You go like, okay, here's a bare minimum of like theory and practice which triggers this process, and that begins the process, and that's what happens. And that's what these various friends of mine all do. Some of them never mention ancestral movement, but they, you know, they teach highly influenced by it, and it's the same process, which I'm really, really stoked and really happy about. But I think for me, the main reason, like honestly, the main reason we haven't done teacher trainings is the same reason. Like I've just mostly been doing like 4 big retreats a year and a few workshops here and there, is because I'm focused on, I'm still, you know, Dane can probably pick some sort of spiral dynamics stage on a ladder that this marks me as, but I'm still really focused on my own practice because I really, really love it. You know, it's like every year it's getting more and more and more interesting, and the teaching and sharing makes it even more interesting. It really does accelerate my personal practice massively. But I've still got a bit of that reclusive personality type, you know? So it's like, yeah, I love teaching intensives, and we do it. But I'll do a week intensive and I'll need a month off, man, you know? Like I'll teach 2-3 weekends back to back. And then it's like, cool. Like if I've got enough money to live on for the next like 3 months, like then I don't feel that massive pressure to make it a huge thing. I feel like I will eventually, you know, but it's like now we've just had our first baby, and it's like that's partly a pressure to put the systems in place so it doesn't require me. Obviously, I'm really inspired by people who do that, but partly it's like, you know, like you guys laughing at me trying to get my phone to work, trying to download the right app. It's like, just want to chill out in the forest and do my pranayama, you know? Yeah.
Well, I love that you brought up James Scoutcross, because that was a part of where that question comes from for you specifically, is like, James gave me a bunch of his videos for training a while back, and I was practicing and sitting there and I'm like, fuck, like this is the end of the road. Dessert, like I'm watching this, and due to respect to James as someone, and I know he doesn't really like his stuff being given out without his consent and without his personal transmission, I was like, what is the right thing here? I want to give this to everyone right now, because everyone could benefit from this. It's beyond James. I love James, but it's beyond him, because of this thing that he's channeled is incredible. And that's just the thing of like ancestral movement. I don't want it to be a forgotten language. That's why I ask, do you have practitioners? And
yeah,
like you said,
I will, like, for me, it's like, you know, I've had a book in there for years now. It's just a matter of like setting aside the time, making it an object that exists in the world, not just inside me. And it's the same with the practices. It's the same with documenting on video. It's like, just it'll come, because I do, you know, it's like, I'm not trying to save the world, but I do feel like, you know, like we said in the beginning, this whole thing emerged because I felt like I had a perspective on things which no one else had, and I feel like it's valuable. And I still feel that, you know, I still feel like it's like, yep, no, I've got an angle on this stuff which is quite unique, and I want to share it. You know, I want to share it. So I will, and I would love for other people to be sharing it as well with their own personal flavors. You know, it's not ancestral movement, can't be Simon Thakur. It's like, the whole point is it's a way of going into what's inside all humans, you know? So
yeah. And I love that you say it's a part of the recluse in you that doesn't fully want to go out there, because if you, I do believe you have this like mystique figure, you know, about you, even just on social media itself. Like I don't even think there's any photos of you anywhere, and it's mostly shared in a Facebook group, you know, and the community in there is amazing. Like people are really active in there. And then there's the opposite side when you become this person that teaches practitioners, someone like Dane and Vanessa. I see you as like, in a very like polarized way, like there's a cult leader archetype.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Too.
Don't do it, Simon. Don't fucking do it. It's not worth your sanity.
Thing, right? Is like, I've been a member of various cults. You know, I'm still a member of various cults. I like to always be part of multiple cults. I think that protects you from the dangers of just being fully committed to one cult. But I'm a member of various cults, and I've been a part of all sorts of cults. And so I'm really wary of cult leader figures. I've learned from some amazing cult leaders, and the things that sprang up around them were incredible containers for deep, intensive practice, but also really fucking dodgy power dynamics, which were being abused, you know? And so I've been consciously quite wary of that happening around me, you know. Maybe that's my excuse for just not having what it takes. But you know, but like when it starts getting creepy and like, you know, there's a lot of and I feel like these, but honestly, compared to 10 years ago, partly because of social media and partly because of, you know, out of control call out culture and whatever, each one of those things, I feel like they have been really beneficial. And I feel like all of us in these worlds, people are getting much, much better at leading, teaching, sharing, creating structures and organizations, and then making mistakes along the way and coming to, you know, more shared, less hierarchical, more healthy sorts of less cult-like. It can still be a cult. I don't think cult's necessarily a dirty word. I love cults. But not falling into some of those traps. So part of my hesitancy has been, you know, like maybe I missed my Dunning-Kruger phase. My Dunning-Kruger phase happened before social media. So I wasn't able to explode on social media because I was, you know, whatever. But partly it's, caution around some of those less, because things get out of control, you know. You can release something and then it can become like a a big thing. And it's like, yeah, I don't have any answer there. It's just some of the stuff that I think about with.
Yeah, all the observant part of it for me is like, I guess it's, yeah, sort of what you're saying is like, there's that prolific, delusional confidence that shoots people into that cult leader status, but it sort of is needed to get to this pinnacle. But a lot of cult leaders, they get up here, and if they survive that ego trip all the way up here, they get to have a even more like recluse mystic part of them that is evolved into, this empire is there, but then you can go back to the bushes by the fire, but I feel like that's sort of where Dane and Vanessa are slowly heading now, is like I see not as much as loud on social media and all these places, and coming back to self and then learning it from other people. I'm curious to hear from either side, like how you feel about yourself in those areas of like when it was the really prolific, like, I want to be the cult leader, everyone look at me.
Look, it's not that I'm such a mature, great guy. It's just that, the real returns of being a cult leader, that's gone, man. That was the 80s, where you could get away with all that shit. So there's really no fun in it anymore, I think, is the biggest thing I've noticed. I'm kind of being really facetious, but what I've noticed is even letting people pedestal you a little bit is a real fucking pain in the ass, And I'm not talking like, I've never been mega fucking famous or anything like that, but I've definitely I've allowed people to put me up a bit, and then it's like, fuck, they're going to put you down a bit. And if you allow them to put you up a lot, well, they're going to smash you down a lot, And so it's the same as like, I got to get a little bit of fame in my 30s. When I look at people who got a fuckload of fame in their 20s, it's like, whoa, you gave that kid a real powerful horse or a real powerful drug. And it's like, what, people who became famous movie stars, singers, that kind of stuff, and then catapult to fame. And, even young entrepreneurs that get very wealthy very quickly. I think on some level it was meant to happen, but on a personal level, it's 8 out of 10. It's not a good ride for them, in the long term, it fucking kicks their ass. And so I feel like I got to have the micro journey of that, get a bit big and act like a little bit of a dick, and then get a little bit of a tough ride afterwards. And it was just like, I still want a lot of impact and financial success and a lot of other things. Like I've never really decided I don't want that, but I have definitely gone through a cyclic journey of really yin, really yang, big expansion, big contraction, and gone like, okay, well, I don't want to do this the extreme way. What's the sustainable way, And it's like, okay, well, for one, it's not even that it's wrong to be some charismatic, powerful leader type, but I think I've had it revealed to me over time that that's actually not what I'm cut out for. Otherwise, it would have already happened to a certain level. It started to reveal. It's like, I'm actually really good at bringing groups of people together, and I'm actually really good at formulating systems that replicate, and I'm actually really good at constructing message and narrative. And actually, the more I get out of the way, the quicker it seems to go, So I actually have a lot of the same goals that I had when I was in my, like, if we want to call it, the Dunning-Kruger overconfident phase. But I've been able to sit back and go like, the idea that me posting on social media lots is going to be what reaches 1 million people, that's a fucking really inefficient way to try to do that, And especially as my appetite for doing that has shifted. It's like, fuck, I still want to reach millions of people. It's like, yeah, not by me posting more videos. Like, that's clearly, I got to see my peak of enthusiasm and then for that to drop off. And part of me is like, why would you want to be a pop star? Surely you'd rather like own all the record labels. That'd be a much more fun situation. So there's actually, I still have quite a lot of ambition in certain ways, but it's more systemic than personal. You know, I'd rather create systems that replicate without me, because it's really fucking boring just have to do the same thing 12 times in a row for me. Like that's the worst scenario. Like I don't want to teach, and I just did it and it was super enjoyable when I'm there. I don't want to teach first level spiral pracs. I want to be in like the 9th level secret room that you had to get through all the hoops where we just do weird fucking magic that is a one-time thing. And you come back next year and we're on a boat going down the Nile and it'll be completely different. And it's like, just that will be my ideal transmission experience. And it's like, oh, you're a level 9 practitioner. Okay, Dane has an invite only. You're going to be putting fucking crystals up your asshole on day 1. You know, it's going to be, you're not going to make it in here with any taboos or fears, or it's going to be like quite intense. And it's like, we can only have 20 people. And that will be my ideal teaching situation. You just be creating crazy fucking crucibles, but you need everyone to be at a level they can handle that. Like you can't do that with people who've just read a book and went to an introductory 1-day workshop. It's like, okay, if they're like 10 years deep, have completed the 3rd initiation in the Western esoteric tradition and can handle their projections and their shit, we can create more of a magical play creativity container. And so it's like, that's my idea of success now, rather than everyone liked my post. It's like, fuck, that's actually so unambitious. That's like, you know, you thought that was building the fucking castle, but that's actually just like a brick. And you just put down one brick and then did a victory dance. It's like, it's nothing. So in a way, I feel like I'm kind of becoming more into my visionary stage now. And it's like, and it's a weird dance of like, I'm getting humbler in some areas. Like, oh, like other people, like we had Kylie Ryan teach the sort of mindset piece on day 6 of spiral practitioner training. And I was watching it going like, I think she did this better than how I do it. Look at them. They all understand what she's saying. You know, I'm not like the cranky wizard going, why don't they know this shit already? You know, it's like someone who is passionate to teach this piece should be who's teaching this piece. And it's like, wow, let's get the next person. And so I'm just shifting from like, I want to build systems and culture rather than like, I want to be famous or whatever. Like, it's like, that's really fucking boring and small, you know. I want to create things that ripple out to a lot of people that are not dependent on me. So it is like, I think it's interesting hearing Simon talk, and it's like me and Vanessa are like cast as the like social media narcissist or whatever. That there's a fucking super introverted person sitting inside and going, oh fuck, like now I've, you know, for me, like I built my thing on breaking rules and like crossbreeding systems to make them better, like a kind of genetic monster. And then people start learning my stuff. I'm like, he's doing it wrong. Now we have to create rules. And then we're going to have to like have some way of like getting people to agree to do it. I fucking hate that stuff. Now I've got a responsibility to create duty of care documents and like fucking certification and like, whoa, I never even completed any course ever. Like I don't have no certificates. Now I have to make a fucking whole department inside my organization to make sure everyone is certified and like continues to educate. It's like the price for letting this wildfire out of the box. You know, it's not that I'm molesting everyone. It's that I'm fucking have to learn how to like roll out standards and quality assurance. Like that's the real fucking hell, you know, which I'm kind of graduating from now, which is like, you know, So don't create a modality. Just don't. That's my
basically don't fucking do it.
Fucking just
don't do it.
Yeah.
Wait, I feel like that's the perfect wrap on this this container.
Totally
all right, everyone, how to start a modality is
just
don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't fucking do it.
No, I really appreciate all of you coming on and sharing so much fucking wisdom, because like within all the topics that we talked on it, within cult leaders, cultural appropriation, and like starting something and just having the audacity to continue on and allow this transmission that you've received or you've cultivated, or a language that's within you that has to be spoken to others. I think it just takes a lot, and there is just a mystique level about it that a lot of us don't understand, that haven't been through that journey, and to be able to access people like yourselves that are doing it in different areas and to have this conversation recorded is like going to bring just as much value, like in its own way, for different people that can relate on a different level. So I really appreciate all three of you coming in to have that conversation with me and with one another. So thank you. And I'm just going to hit, unless you have anything to say before I close this.
I was just going to say thanks, bro.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rose.
Yeah, thanks. Nice.
And
Nice to see everyone.
And you should listen to my podcast. It's the Dane Tomas podcast on Spotify. It's really good.
Plug all your things. Everyone.
Yeah. I got no things at the moment. Nothing to plug.
When's Ancestral Movement coming back?
I think Dane's gonna interview me for his podcast, though.
I would love to.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. No, we'll be back soon. It all depends, man. Like, I'm not really that keen on doing a sterile, no touching ancestral movement retreat where we have to sanitize the jungle gym before we touch it each time. So just wait and see at the moment. We're just chilling with our little 6-week-old baby and just loving it. So, we'll explode on the scene like really soon.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And Vanessa, what's going on in your world before we wrap up that people can connect to you with?
Yeah, well, I mean, all this COVID stuff really pushed Eros online, which is really awesome. And I feel like I was quite resistant to that for a long time for various reasons. And now it's just happening and I'm really in a place right now of essentially just rooting down the legacy. I've spent 7 years in this body of work. It's so refined. There's so many stories. I just want to share them. I want to get them online. I want there to be just teachings that people can go deeper into, and then the courses can be taught by others. So yeah, I feel like it's very much pulling online for me right now. And so people can just deepen into this without, me having to be there and transmitting. I feel like that phase is starting to go for me a little bit. So yeah, if you're curious about Eros, or if you want to work with me as well, I'm starting to step into one-on-one stuff again. And yeah, I feel a bit behind the veil and not so interested in even this thing. I was like, oh God, I don't want to be on the screen talking. And, I'm so done with being the star. It's just so, but yeah, Eros is fucking amazing. And it's got a lot of history and lineage to it, and I think there's something to that, to go and learn from people who've had their ass in the game for a while, and they know what they know what that is to journey for longer than a 1-week course. So I feel like Eros has got that. We've got history. So if you're feeling the vibes, check it out. Things are happening. If not, enjoy your life.
There. She followed him and soon found herself falling a very deep hole into a strange place called Curious Conversation. Nowadays, there are still girls and boys whose curiosity leads them to strange places.